In this video, we'll be looking at several areas concerning fractions and their uses. What are the component parts of a fraction? How to create equivalent fractions. How you can use a calculator to help with simplifying and ordering fractions. How do you go about writing something as a fraction of another number? We'll look at how to find fractions of an amount. And finally, how to convert from mixed numbers to improper fractions and back again. Here we have a fraction which is made up of two parts and really means an unfinished division of the top number by the bottom. You'll find that when we write division in later videos, we'll write it as a fraction. As the numerator is smaller than the denominator in this example of 2/5, this fraction is what's called a proper fraction, meaning that the value of the fraction is between 0 and 1. Here's what is called an improper fraction, 11/7. As the numerator is greater than the denominator, and means that the value of this fraction is greater than 1. We'll be looking at how to convert this from an improper fraction into a mixed number later on in this video. If we have a fraction like this one, 6/6, where the top is equal to the bottom, then the value of the fraction is exactly 1 and can be converted as such. Next, we'll be looking at finding equivalent fractions and cancelling down to find the fraction in its simplest form. If we take this first fraction of 2/5 and multiply both top and bottom by 2, I'll get the fraction of 4/10. Although we're using different numbers, the value of the fraction remains the same. We could continue to multiply both top and bottom number by a variety of different numbers, and as long as we do the same to both the top and the bottom, the value of the fraction remains the same. So if we times the top by 200, we'll get 400, and if we times the bottom by 200, we'll get 1000. 400/1000 is still an equivalent fraction to 2/5. Again, we could do the same with 6. Times the top by 6, we'll get 12. If we times the bottom by 6, we'll get 30. 12/30 is still an equivalent fraction to 2/5. However, the most useful process that we can do with this knowledge is to divide or cancel down the fraction to find it in its simplest form of the fraction. This means using the smallest integers possible in the fraction. To do this, the quickest method is to use the HCF, or highest common factor, that we spoke about in the factors video, and divide both top and bottom by that. If you're unaware of what the HCF is, use the smallest number you know that will go into both, and continue to divide by that until you reach numbers that have no further common factors. So we have 42/70. We know that they're both even numbers, so we can divide them both by 2, which is a great place to start. So divide them both by 2, you get 21/35. We then also can see that 7 goes into both 21 and 35, so we can divide top and bottom by 7 and get 3/5. If we did know what the highest common factor is, which is 14, we could divide them both by 14 and get 3/5 straight away. One of the things you'll notice is that you divide it by 2 and then divide it by 7, and 2 times 7 will give you 14 as well. So it's a way of learning how to find highest common factors as well. We can also use a calculator to complete this process, and it has several buttons that we'll be using specifically with fractions. Firstly, the calculator has a fractions button, which along with the directional keys allows you to enter any fraction you should wish to use. Here we have the fractions button, and we have the directional keys located just here that we can use to enter the numbers in for a fraction. So here we have the fraction button, and we can do 25 divided by 100, and we can simplify this fraction by pressing equals, and the calculator simplifies it for us to 1/4. Sometimes your answers are given as fractions. For instance, if I was to do 11 divided by 7, it will give me 11/7. This can't be simplified to integers, so if we press the SD button, which stands for surds to decimals, because we want it as a decimal, we press that and we get 1.571428, and the 571,428 is recurring as signified by the dots just above the 5 and the 8. Now we're going to look at how you would find one number as a fraction of another, and we can do this very simply if we look at this picture here. How many squares are there compared to how many there are coloured? Well, as there are 7 out of the 12 squares that are coloured, this means that we could say the fraction of coloured squares is 7 over 12. On this next one, we can see that the total number of colour squares is 9 out of 20. Therefore, the fraction of colour squares is 9 over 20, or 9/20. Here you can see we have 21 squares and a total of 5 of them are coloured. You could say this is a fraction of 5 over 21. Next, we'll look at how to go about finding a fraction of an amount. Let's start with finding a half of 80. And you could write this as a multiplication problem and say 80 times a half. So here you have 80 times a half. When you're multiplying by a fraction, you always divide by the bottom number of the fraction, or the denominator, and then times by the top number of the numerator. 80 divided by 2 will give you 40, times by 1 still gives you 40. Next, we want to find 1/5 of 70. 70 times 1 over 5, or 1/5, divide by the bottom, times by the top. 70 divided by 5 would give you 14, times by 1 will still give you 14. These are simpler as they're what's called unit fractions, meaning they have a 1 as the numerator. Let's have a look at how it works if it's not a unit fraction. So here you have 70 times 2 over 5. 70 divided by the bottom number, remember, divided by 5 will give you 14, times by 2 will give you an amount of 28. If we looked at finding 3/7 of 70, 70 divided by 7 will give you 10, times by the 3 would give you 30. But what about if we're trying to find an unsimplified fraction of a number, as we're trying to do here? Here we're trying to find 21 over 49 of 70. So that's going to be 70 times 21 over 49. So here we've got 70 times 21 over 49. What we want to do is we want to simplify that fraction first. We can see that 7 goes into both 21 and 49. So we can divide both top and bottom by 7, and we end up with 3 over 7. We can then, from the calculation above, we can see that this will then equal 30. Now we're going to show how to change from an improper fraction into mixed numbers. Here you have an improper fraction of 26 over 5. In order to convert this, we need to look at how many times the denominator will go into the numerator. So we have 26 over 5. We need to know how many times the 5 will go into 26. Well, 5 times 5 gives us 25, so that's as close as we're going to get without going over. So we're going to put 5 as the whole number. Now we need to work out what the remainder is. 26 take away 25 would give us 1, so we'll put 1 on the top of the remaining fraction over the original denominator of 5. Next, we have 11 over 3. How many times will the denominator go into the numerator? So how many times will 3 go into 11? Well, 3 times 3 will give us 9. So 3 is the whole number that's outside of the fraction. 11 take away 9 would give us 2, which we put over the top as the numerator, and 3 as the denominator, as it was in the original fraction. Lastly, we have 43 over 8. So how many times will 8 go into 43? 8 times 5 will give us 40. If we subtract that from the 43, we get 3 as the remainder. So 5 is the whole number. 3 as the remainder then goes over the top of the original denominator, which was 8. So we end up with 5 and 3/8. Finally, we can look at the reverse of that process and go from mixed numbers back into fractions, or improper fractions. So here we have 2 and 2/7. We do 2 times a 7 would give us 14, plus a 2 would give us 16. That's the new numerator. So we're going to put that on the top of the fraction over the original denominator of 7. That gives us 16 over 7, which is the equivalent improper fraction of the mixed number. In the next one, we have 9 and 1/8. We do 9 times 8, which would give us 72, plus the 1 would give us 73. That is the new numerator, which we put over the top of the original denominator of 8. So 73 over 8, which is the equivalent improper fraction of 9 and 1/8. So in this introduction to fractions, we've gone through the parts of a fraction, which one's the numerator, which one's the denominator, how to go about finding equivalent fractions using the same multiplier and making sure that we do the same to the top and the bottom, how to simplify using the HCF or other factors. We've looked at how a calculator can be used with fractions, how it can be used to simplify or find equivalent fractions, how to find one number as a fraction of another using the numerator and denominator and where to place them. We found fractions of amounts and finally converted improper fractions into mixed numbers and back again. As always, I hope you found this video useful. Our next video in this numbers topic will show how to calculate using fractions in operations such as addition, subtraction, multiplication and division. I'll see you then.